go out on my balcony and I see it again. It appears in the sky, super bright. I'm like, oh, there it is again. And it shot faster than anything I've ever seen move and went down beyond the horizon. Is this an angel? Is this God? Is this a UFO thing? And at that moment, I was like, oh, you have got to be kidding me. I was like, there's no way I'm supposed to follow this thing.
This is Touched by Heaven, everyday encounters with God. Those moments when heaven and earth collide. And we see God, we see his hand reaching out to us, attempting to get our attention, inviting us into a closer relationship. And that's why we share stories here, angel encounters and divine interventions, prophetic dreams, visions, near-death experiences, and all. I am your host, Trapper Jack. Welcome. We have an atheist following a Christmas star. What is this? This is such a great example of how God will meet you wherever you are. You're an atheist? No problem.
I was hoping this would lead me to like a Buddhist center or something like that. Anything but Christianity, right?
This is important too about why I am running this story today. And it reminds me of my own story. I wasn't an atheist. I just didn't care. And I was just out there forever, decades and decades, until that, there was that seduction moment, just like Josh just had with that, what was that thing up there? That light? Was that a UFO? What the heck was that? Went zipping across and following that star, if you will. Okay, something like that happened to me too. I had these little moments where like, what was that? What was that? I was seeking physical healing of my blindness, knowing that the medical world couldn't do anything, and maybe the spiritual world could help. And sure enough, I met these great people, and they helped a bit in that area. But what spiritual blindness? Totally blind to all the stories that we now share on Touched by Heaven, these encounter moments of divine interventions and NDEs and angel stories and prophetic dreams and all these things that we talk about here in this variety of ways that God speaks to us, because God is speaking to you and he's speaking to me and the church and the world, and we're just oblivious. So the reason for this podcast is to say, hey, look over here. They're just God shooting off the flare gun, right? I was totally blind. So I started seeing these things, miracles happening and all that around me. And I was sitting in this office wondering, what are you doing? And there was a Bible here, and I'm Catholic, so I wasn't reading it. Always gets a laugh at a talk. Anyway, so I just stuck my finger in the Bible and say, tell me what it is you're trying to tell me, God. Just Bible roulette, and I got Psalm 40. And Psalm 40 just threw me against the wall because it's my life. I cried out to you, God, I had, and you stooped over, plucked me out of the muck, and I was in muck, and pulled me out and put me on firm ground, he had, and steadied me, he had, and put a new song in my throat for others to hear and be affected by. That's what I'm doing now. I can't stop singing. I can't stop telling the stories or having you tell the stories. I can't stop because of what it did for me, because how it woke me up and the scales fell off the eyes and I could see. So I'm thinking I'm not the only one here that can see by hearing these stories, and so you tell your stories, and we all. And sure enough, I thought, I don't know, will this fly? Will this go? And hundreds were listening, and then thousands, and tens of thousands sometimes, and sometimes more. And you go, okay, this is working. But what stunned me, still stuns me, is that with so many of us coming to our faith through these stories, it just stunned me of how inside the church you just don't hear about this kind of witnessing. Here's what happened to me. Here's how I was healed. Here's what an angel did for me. Here's what this NDE did. You just don't hear it that much inside the church. You hear it out here, not inside. So, and I'm going, boy, the world needs this stuff. The world just needs this. And so we started sharing these stories, and thank you for your stories and all of that. So now we have Josh. Josh comes along to lead up to why I'm running this episode. I've run this episode before. It was a couple of years back, and here's why I'm bringing it back and why it's so important to bring it back today. I was invited back to the national radio show, Coast to Coast AM, George Norrie and all that kind of stuff, and come back and tell stories, Christmas morning, Jesus stuff, God stuff. I've done this, and I get to talk for 2 hours about God and Jesus and miraculous things on this paranormal show, because God is the original paranormal. And in this world of UFOs and ESP and ghosts and all that, here comes the original paranormal, supernatural, Godspeak kind of stuff, and I get to go for 2 hours, 3 hours in this case this year, and just tell stories and how cool that is. So it's like, okay, that's great. And then Elizabeth hands me the name that I'm supposed to do a Patreon shout out for this week. I see Joshua Young. I go, wait a minute, Joshua Young. You just heard his voice a little bit ago. I went back to the episode. Joshua supports us, but he's also a story on how God seduced him, had him following that star, and guess where it led him? So when I saw Josh was the Patreon shout out, I thought, oh, obviously God wants Josh to be the story. So you Coast to Coast AM folks who are coming to maybe check out the podcast for the first time, this is your introduction to Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God, as a way of bringing you in closer to how God is speaking to you, me, the church, and the world. So enjoy Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God. What does he want to know?
The prayer I had prayed, if there's anything out there that's supernatural, I would like you to give me an experience.
He just wants an experience to know whether or not, if there is something beyond this physical world, because he is an atheist, and he'll get into the whys and wherefores, but what are you saying?
I'm basically saying if there's any non-human intelligence interacting with us.
Oh, okay. Angels, demons, it could be anything.
Exactly. Angels, demons, aliens, supernatural beings, anything. That was how far I was into atheism. I legit didn't believe in any of it at that point. I just thought it was all made up. And at this point in time, I was still occasionally having that dark presence appear in my life.
Darkness? What darkness? And when? Josh grew up in a home that had faith, Protestant, non-denominational, but when he got to his teens, things started getting very dark.
Where I was having a dark presence enter my room at night, probably a couple times a week. And this dark presence would make all of my hair stand up on end. I was awake. I remember this one time I was actually went and grabbed my dad and brought him down to my room to be like, hey, I can feel this in here. And he didn't remember like feeling anything. But this was a recurring thing. I just felt really fearful, and it was driving me to the place of nearly being suicidal. And I had a dream when I was around probably 14, 15 years old. Out of the darkness, there is a dog that lunges out of me at me. So it's just like it almost like materialized in front of my face, lunging toward me. And when it gets right in front of my nose, I hear a clink, and I look down, and it was on a chain, and the chain like went off into the darkness. And I woke up instantly as soon as this happened. And this little voice says, Josh, no matter how far the devil goes, he's always on a chain.
There's only so far he can go. There are limits.
And there are limits, exactly. At that point in time, I woke up from this dream and I go, oh man, like I'm just so glad that was just a dream. If only I hadn't been so brainwashed, I wouldn't believe these things, right? That was my thinking. I was legit 100% an atheist to the point where I was dismissing everything. And the dark presence went away. It just completely disappeared from my life. And I decided, okay, this would have been around the age of 23, I think, when this happened. Fast forward roughly 10 years. I had gotten so sick of like the political situation in the US and the fact that, my religious family and everybody around me that I knew was religious. I wanted to escape, and I decided to move to Sweden. So this would have been back in early 2017. I decided to move to Sweden. I applied at Spotify.
Josh's interview for the Spotify job is in London. He stays at an Airbnb. There's a woman that runs it. She tells him, there's another guy here. His name is Rodney.
I go to bed that night. I get up in the morning, and I'm in the shower. And I hear the owner come by. And she says, excuse me, sir. And I'm like, why is she bothering me here in the bathroom? Hey, yeah, what do you need? And there's no response. So I'm like, well, that's kind of rude. Like, why would somebody do that? Like, finish the shower, go off. There's a Halloween party that night. Go to the Halloween party again and go to bed, get up the next morning, go into the shower, and guess what happens? I hear, excuse me, sir. Well, now I'm annoyed because I'm like, really annoyed because I'm like twice I'm getting interrupted in the shower. I mean, it's a really vulnerable time, right? Like, so I respond again and I'm like, yeah, what do you need? No response. Finish the shower and I open the door to leave the shower and I step out And Rodney is sitting right there, 6 to 9 feet away from the door of the bathroom. And he looks up and he says, "Josh, who were you talking to?" I'm like, "Well, the owner must have come by. Like, there's somebody must have come through here, right?" Again, he's like, "No, absolutely nobody came by. We're the only two people in the house." So I'm stumped. And then he goes, "I heard something too." And I was like, "Well, what did you hear?" And he goes, "I heard like a whooshing sound." It was unlike anything he'd ever heard before. And I was like, "Well, where did you hear it from?" And he said, "Head height in front of the bathroom door." And I was like, "What in the world?" He says, "Josh, are you religious?" And I say, "No, but I used to be." And then he goes, "Oh, well, that's probably what it is." Well, I'm like, there's no way this guy actually thinks that this is something spiritual. We're standing there. The owner comes back in the house and her response, "Oh, Josh, yeah, stuff like that happens all the time. This place is haunted." My brain I blue screened, right? It's like your computer crashing. I was just like, wait, what? Like, I didn't believe in anything supernatural at all. And here I was having this experience, right? And at the time, I did not connect this back 100% to the prayer that I'd prayed. So that day was the day I did my interview at Spotify. And interview went fantastic. I got the job, and then I completely forgot about this experience for about 8 or 9 months.
At this 8 or 9 month mark, he's realizing that nothing is going right. Everything seems to be going against him. Relationships that seem to be blossoming suddenly aren't. Success is about to happen, but it doesn't. Work isn't going right. Relationships, everything is pushing against him. He's miserable.
And it was almost like, as an atheist, I wanted to be mad at God, but it was like I wanted to be mad at a God I didn't believe existed.
Are you making a connection at this point that you have unplugged from something and therefore bringing less than satisfactory results?
Yes, exactly. I'm starting to connect that maybe this spiritual realm thing is real and I've screwed up. And I prayed a prayer, and my prayer went like this: God or angels or aliens or whatever's out there, I don't know what is going on, but I am tired of living my life for myself. And at that exact same moment, that dark presence, that demonic presence, reappeared in my room stronger than I had ever felt it in my life. Like, there was something so mad at me that I sat there petrified in fear. And it happened at that exact instant I prayed that prayer. So the dark presence was gone. And then when I was an atheist completely, and then as soon as I prayed that prayer saying I didn't want to live my life for myself anymore, the dark presence came back.
Wow.
Well, those with theological knowledge will understand the implications here. It's just the idea being, okay, clearly Josh has pissed off the devil, right? And now the devil is like attacking me, and it was awful for months. I was dealing with this dark presence, like, again, and I could feel it from a distance. I would be walking home from work and I could feel it about 30, 40 feet away from my apartment. And I didn't know what to do about it. Like, I didn't know what to do other than I started to kind of reverse all the steps that I had taken to atheism. And I was going back and I was starting to study like supernatural things and paranormal things and trying to understand what's going on. And I had a meeting with a friend of mine named Jacob. We were both meeting there in Stockholm, and we sat down in this park. And I'm telling him the story of this voice in this apartment at the Airbnb, because I was starting to realize that my entire perspective of the universe was now changing. If I was going to believe in anything supernatural, all of my atheist life was gone. So I lay back in the grass, and at that moment, I see 2 tiny little objects high up in the sky flying along. And I turn to Jacob and I'm like, "What's that?" And he looks up and he sees them too, and he has no idea what they are. This was daytime, bright blue sky. I'm watching these fly across the sky. And I'm like, this is getting really weird. Like, I mean, obviously my head is going toward UFOs, right? That's where my head's at. I knew tiny little silver objects flying insanely fast through the sky. So whatever they were, it was very strange. I understand this is strange. I understand this is weird.
And they're flying in some sort of parallel to each other in kind of some...
Yep.
Okay.
So it'll start to make a little more sense here in a little bit, because so all of this stuff ties up at the end. I decide I have to talk to Rodney. I get on the phone with him. I'm like, "Rodney, I think... Can you tell me in your own words what happened in that apartment a year ago?" And Rodney goes, "You know what? I'm a strong Christian. I may not be the best Christian, but I really do firmly believe in everything in the Bible. And I am convinced that what you experienced that day was a message that was meant only for you. And his words were, and I was supposed to be the witness. So all of that clicked together, and I'm like, oh man, this is not what I wanted him to tell me. I legitimately would much rather take a pill for being schizophrenic than turn back to Christianity. But he was basically confirming during that call that the prayer I had prayed had been answered in a way I never would have imagined whatsoever. And he almost like verbatim outlines what I didn't want to be true as an atheist, that this was the answer to that prayer.
Remember the prayer, if you can call it that, as an atheist. But if there is a God or a good angel or a demon or an alien or some kind of spiritual being out there, give me a sign of something I want and experience. And it seems he's getting them.
He said, I want you to read a book about a saint that lived back in the 40s and did lots of miracles and other stuff like that. Well, that was Padre Pio. So I get this book. He says, don't read just any book on this person, right? Don't read any book on Padre Pio. I want you to read this particular book. So I'm reading that book, and there's all these miracles and everything like that, as you probably know with Padre Pio. And I it was interesting to me, but it was at the end of the book when I come across a quote from Padre Pio. And that quote is, "The devil is like a rabid dog tied to a chain. Beyond the length of the chain, he cannot seize anyone. And you keep a distance. If you approach too near, you let yourself be caught. Remember that the devil only has one door by which to enter the soul, the will." Clink. And I completely broke down. I was just bawling my eyes out because that entire dark period of my life now was connected to what was going on here. And all of these events that had led up to this point were all connected together. And I realized that basically this was heaven's way of telling me, yeah, there is truth in this Christianity thing. And I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. And I had no way out of it, right? Like there was no way I could, what's the word? I had no excuses. When I was 15 and all this dark stuff was happening, heaven knew what was going to happen. Heaven would have known I was going to pray that prayer. Heaven would have known I was going to become an atheist. And heaven would have like prepped all of that. And then at that point in the future, that particular quote would show up because it was the only recommendation I had at that point in time was to read that exact book. And that quote was near the end of the book. So I had to read all the way to the end of it for all of this to click together.
Yeah, it's God's DVR. Yeah, he knows.
It was.
He knows it all, man. Beginning, middle, and end. He knows.
Yeah, exactly. And I was bawling like I said, I'm bawling my eyes out. But then I'm still like, there are still so many loose ends. What in the world are these two things flying in the sky? What's going on? I get off the phone with him. And the dark presence came back into my room right after I got off the call with him. It was awful. And for the first time in my life, I felt a light presence enter the room. There was a light that like almost a blinding, like the polar opposite of the dark presence, filled the room. It split into two, what I'm going to call angels, and they went to either end of my apartment, and I heard a small voice tell me, you need this protection. For the next period of time, I was dealing with this dark presence, I could feel that there was a war going on, that there was like a legit war for some reason going on over me. And that these angels were protecting me from whatever this was. All I know was that there were two white presences, which I'm going to call angels, that were protecting me from this. And I'm studying like crazy again. I'm like, what's going on? And then something weird started happening with this UFO thing, if you want to call it that. I went out on my balcony at one point to smoke a cigarette. And I look up and it was blue sky, but it was late. In the summer in Sweden, so the sun doesn't go completely down sometimes. I mean, it goes down, but it's still light a little bit. And I see this star in the sky, this super, super bright star, and it was moving. I'm looking at it, and it's like slightly moving. And as soon as I kind of like focused in on it completely, it disappeared, just completely disappeared. Well, this kept happening. It didn't just happen once. This happened like half a dozen times. Where I would, over a period of several months, I would go out on my balcony and I would see this star thing in the sky and it would disappear as soon as I looked at it. So I'm studying all this stuff on UFOs and everything like that and trying to figure out, has anybody ever had an experience like this before? What is going on? How does this relate to Padre Pio? That makes absolutely no sense. How did these things all connect together? And I started dating this girl in Sweden, and I go out with her one night, and we're chatting, and she's telling me that she's dealing with depression. She feels like she has to go out drinking, even though she doesn't really want to. And she says she has this dark hole in her chest that she feels like she can't get rid of. And I'm praying to God, and I'm saying, God, angels, what do I do about this? Like, how do I pray for somebody like this? I know something exists. I've read this book on Padre Pio. I know some part of Christianity is true. What do I do with this? And a word is like almost screamed into my head. And the word was deliverance. And that was the thing I was supposed to pray for. And I was like, deliverance from what? Are you saying like pray specifically for deliverance from, the devil? Are you saying pray deliverance from some sort of a mental thing? Like, what is going on? What is this deliverance thing, right? And I wrote it in my journal. I actually wrote in my journal that I'd received the word deliverance, and I wasn't quite sure what it was for. Next day or 2 days later, I can't remember the timeline, but I go out on my balcony and I see it again. It appears in the sky, super bright. I'm like, oh, there it is again. And then it disappears. And I look back and it reappeared again a second time, and it disappeared. And I'm like, whoa, it's never done this before. And I look back and it appeared again, and it shot from a standstill, accelerated from a standstill, faster than anything I've ever seen move, and went down beyond the horizon and disappeared over the horizon. And I'm like, whoa, okay, so this is something. Like something supernatural is paying attention to me. Is this an angel? Is this God? Is this a UFO thing? I don't like a classical UFO thing. I have no idea, right? But this was just like an orb. It was just like an orb of fixed light. That was it. When it shot away from me, it went down past the horizon. So it was actually moving so fast. It like instantly went from standstill, basically gently moving, maybe like the speed of a drifting balloon was basically about the speed it was moving in the sky, and it accelerated down past the horizon. About a week later, 2 weeks later, I don't remember. I was like studying stuff on UFOs. I'm like, I couldn't find any stories in all of history, all recorded history. I was digging through everything you could possibly imagine of anybody that had a recurring star-like UFO appear to them. Except for, when it hit me, there is one story where that happened. And everybody knows it. It's the Christmas star. And at that moment, I was like, oh, you have got to be kidding me. I was like, there's no way I'm supposed to follow this thing. Like, that's beyond insane. And I was like, so I prayed, and I said, God, angels, that's the only story I know in all of history that I can find of this ever happening to anybody. If you want me to follow this, do it again. Well, you can guess what happened. A couple days later, I go out on my balcony. I'm looking all over the place. I don't see it anywhere. And right at the exact instant that I gave up, I see it shoot out of the sky to the same place it went to before. I grab my phone. I go to Google Maps. I point Google Maps to where this star went. And I start scrolling, and I come across an entry on Google Maps that just says New Life. And I click it, and it's a church. And it's an English-speaking church. I was hoping this would lead me to like a Buddhist center or something like that. Anything but Christianity, right? It was a Protestant Christian church, and I decide I have to go. So I go to this church, and I'm sitting there in church, and the pastor that was there that Sunday, and he happened to be doing a special series on spiritual warfare. He puts up his slides, and guess what word is plastered against the bright blue background on his first slide? It was the word deliverance. That word I had written in my journal a few weeks before. And I nearly fell out of my chair.
Let's pause right about here in this wild conversion of Josh. And we'll get back more, and we're going to get into his thoughts on all the things that we've just talked about, and then some coming up in just a moment. Quick Patreon shout out, and I already told you who it is. This is the gentleman you're listening to right now, Joshua Jung. It's to thank you for supporting what we do, because when this all began, just a sidebar, when we started podcasting, I had just been nudged at a radio. There was no income coming in. I got 2 kids leaving the state to go to college and film school and everything. And it's like, oh my gosh. And I put off doing Patreon stuff because I just didn't like asking for money. And yeah, we needed it. And yeah, we still do. I wouldn't want to try to live on what Patreon provides, but it helps. It just helps us do what we do and to keep us focused on this. I have heard so many times people tell me that there's just nothing else quite like this out there. I talked recently to Roy, and Roy is on Patreon, but Roy found me through the Coast to Coast AM show. That's what he happened to tune into one night.
But he's got a podcast called Touched by Heaven. That'll give you an idea.
Can you hear that at all?
Yeah, as George Norrie, Coast to Coast AM.
Trapper Jack, also known as Philip Keller, back with us.
I just wanted you to know. That's where I found you, full of joy, full of passion for the Lord, talking about miracles exist today just like they did 2,000 years. You are a guy that went progressively blind, and there wasn't an ounce of bitterness or an ounce of anything inside you. There was the glory of God just radiating out to you, and I said, I want some of that, okay?
It didn't take you long to jump into the Patreon family, and I just kind of curious why. Most people listen. Podcasts are free. What did that for you?
You got me back in like I said, I drifted away from the church. Then I found you. Now I'm still going because of you. It's so rewarding because I see so many people listening to you and loving you and getting inspired. And I just like that. I like it a lot. I just want to know that all you're doing for everybody in the world, it's not wasted. There's one individual here that you made a big difference on, okay? You are gonna see again.
Oh, I know.
But you are going to see again. I promise you're going to see again. But unfortunately, you're that same disciple that was crippled. And he goes, I can use you better this way.
Thanks, Roy. He is just such a sweetheart. He is. And he is an example, as I am an example, that this actually works. This does something. It does something. If it does something for you, go to patreon.com and search for Trapper Jack. Any amount is correct. Whatever that is great. It does allow us to do this, to devote as much time as we do to Touched by Heaven with what my wife does. My IT person who is in so over her head, but still she makes this all work. God bless you, Elizabeth. And somehow it just all works, and it's just God's plan, even to the point where God led us to Josh today. All right, let's get back to Josh here on Touched by Heaven. Everyday encounters with God.
And I knew at that moment that I had to get my life together and that the thing I needed deliverance from was whatever this darkness was that had been chasing me around. And so I met with some of the people at the church there. They came over, they prayed, and that dark presence did go away. And I have since then devoted my life completely back to following the Lord. And I do not have answers to everything that happened in my story, but that is what happened. If there's one sort of lesson I feel like I learned from it, it was that almost very similar to Howard Storm's story, because he had a lot that he experienced during his near-death experience, right? You know, where he talks about how basically when he asked Jesus what he was supposed to live his life for, he was supposed to live his life for love. But Jesus didn't seem that interested in exactly which version of Christianity you were following. And in Howard Storm's words, most of the deep doctrinal stuff that people agree on, they don't really have a proper understanding anyway. So that stuff isn't as important as loving others. And I feel like that was sort of the message that God wanted to communicate through what happened, was basically, yes, Josh, there is lots of things in this universe that you don't understand. There is lots of life. There are lots of things going on, and you don't have to understand all of it, but you can still follow me. And that's the gist of the story.
This message is so strong, Josh. It's so strong. It popped up on episode 200 when a Hindu by the name of Santosh, he gets a near-death experience, and in the afterlife, he finds, a Hindu is not expecting to find this Jesus guy. And there he is outside the gates of heaven. And the beautiful theology of what Santosh experienced was, he said, I saw 12 giant gates. Well, that's what Revelation says too, representing the tribes of Israel. And there was this narrow door, and the only way into heaven was through the narrow door, the narrow gate, as Jesus said. and all of this theologically correct stuff. And when he kept asking Jesus, okay, I'm going back, you're sending me back, but which church, which synagogue, which mosque, which temple, which one? And Jesus just looked at him. So he asked him 2 or 3 times, which one? And Jesus said, what's important to me is that you and I have an honest, sincere, truthful relationship. The church is supposed to help us get there. The point is that we can go to church every day, but if we're not in a relationship with Jesus, we're missing it.
Right.
And that's obviously where they led you. If I can go back a little bit here and just kind of go through your story a little bit. First, what was your problem with Christianity that you fought it so hard?
It was almost purely intellectual. So, I'm a software engineer, right? I worked at Spotify and some various other software companies. I've been doing this for a long time. I was a very methodical thinker, and I wanted all of my sort of ducks lined up in a row on the intellectual side. And I think that perhaps I was influenced by a slight brand of Christianity that tended to focus heavily on believing the right things and less heavily on acting the right way. For me, it wasn't like the problem of evil that was necessarily the main thing. For me, it was mostly like all the weird stuff in the Bible, which is funny to say now because I just went through a bunch of weird stuff myself, right? But it was like, okay, how do I know that these things actually happened? How can I have some proof that these things happened? And if I can find a problem with any of them, then my entire faith sort of collapses. Because I think for a lot of people that are raised Christian, they've sort of built up a house of cards. And they're not really sure which pieces of their faith are like, they think it's all tied together, like tightened up like a knot, right? Like where if one tiny little thing might be slightly different than the way they were taught about Christianity growing up, then the entire thing falls apart. And I think my message now is that similar to, is it Santosh, you said?
Yeah.
I don't think heaven cares that much about whether we have a perfect mental model of what's going on in the spiritual realm. I never got like a perfect answer on what exactly it was I saw in the sky. I never got a perfect answer on what it was or who it was that spoke to me in that apartment. I could speculate about, well, was it, an angel? Was it Jesus? Was it some other thing? Who knows how many other...
Well, that's just it. You asked, is there something else? And you got just about everything. You probably got ghosts. You got angels, as you mentioned. Right. You got demons. You got, potentially, maybe you got UFOs. And it's interesting, UFOs are also tied to the demonic, as you may or may not know, that those are their creatures. If you find there's an episode that we had called Paint by Numbers. Ed was talking, it's his story. He too went outside. He too saw those lights up in the sky. And he too, when he thought about something, they would kind of zip along to his thoughts. And he went, wait a minute, are we connected here? And they were connected. They were in his mind, basically. He was in their minds, however you want to phrase this, so that, and his girlfriend told him, it's like, it's a bad sign. It's a bad sign when you're so connected that when you think something, it zips and zags up there.
Well, the thing I have a difficult time with, though, is why would it lead me to a church then?
And that's curious, because is it the same thing?
Yeah, exactly. Like, these were the questions I was asking. And Howard Storm actually mentioned something during one of his question and answer sessions. And during that, Jesus actually told him, yeah, there's other life forms visiting Earth. Some of them are good. And some of them are very evil. So I think it may be a slight mistake to make the conclusion that it's all bad or all good. If you think of the story of the Magi, for example, we tend to think of it because it says the word star, right? Like we think, oh, what was it, the physical star, right? In that story, at that point in time, they did not believe it was actually a physical star. So there's actually evidence that whatever this was not a classical physical star.
Right. And
it just wouldn't have words.
Well, and if you really think about it, if you're trying to direct me to your house, you're not going to say follow a star because
That
you know
makes
what I
sense.
mean. I mean, let's get real here. But this is because you're not
Yeah.
going to go right across above a stable and this in a cave and all of that. So some of the mystics say it was a star of sorts, but it was like right down here. It was this creation. Others say stars can also be angels too. Stars are referenced as angels and angels as stars sometimes in the Bible, and designed so you could follow a star to a certain spot. So yeah, there's some good questions there, but I found it interesting that in your case, you basically just kind of opened it up, which is always a danger. You just opened yourself up to whatever's on the other side. Well, guess what you got?
Yeah.
You're going the demon's going to jump in there right away, and God's going to allow some things to happen for you to be awakened, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And I think if I were to say like the point of the story to me is that there are dark forces out there, and if you mess with them, similar to the Padre Pio quote, you will be caught. You will be caught. And the truth is that even if you think your life is like perfectly fine, if you've given in your will to resisting what God wants, you're opening yourself up for forces you don't understand. And God is there to deliver you. It's very interesting. My name is Joshua, which is the Hebrew version of Jesus, right?
Right.
And the word Jesus means God is deliverance.
Or God saves. It's kind of who he is and what he does. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a defining trait that God is the one who steps in and rescues and saves people from the darkness into the light. And so I just challenge everybody. It's not so much exactly which version of Christianity you follow. Heaven knows that we're humans and our brains are limited in their understanding. And the reality is that, it is a walk by faith that we have to make, which means we're not always going to get the answers. And so the thing that heaven is looking for is people that are, first of all, wanting to turn to Jesus. And second, that are people that are walking in a way that would be like a little Jesus, right? I mean, the word Christian means a little Christ, right? It's like a little. You're trying to be that light in the world. You're trying to spread light and push the kingdom of God out into the world. And that's now my defining trait in my life. And I really hope this story is helpful to someone. I understand that there's parts of my story that people probably confuse people. But I think if there's one thing out of my story that God gave me is that God is willing to go to any great lengths he needs to. If you sincerely pray and are honest with God, like completely honest with him, no holds barred. He doesn't care how you say it. He doesn't care, any of that, right? Just be honest with him. Be straight. Tell him what you need and ask him to help you. And if God can show up in my life in this way and turn me back to Christianity, he can turn anybody back that's sincere.
That's beautiful. I know we all, some way or shape or form, we want to put God in a box, don't we? And as you just nailed what Sancho said again about I want an honest relationship, sincere, truthful. In other words, if prayer to you is, Jesus, I think the way you set this up sucks, and you're mad at Jesus, he's okay with that. That's a conversation. He can handle that conversation.
Absolutely.
And he wants that conversation. He wants it just like he wanted that conversation with you. You just did not want to swallow all that stuff. And he's going, all right, I'll let you wander around for a while, but I'm going to bring deliverance. Literally.
Exactly. On his time, too. On his time. And not only that, but it gives me massive amounts of comfort knowing that this had all been already planned back when I had the dream about the dog lunging at me out of the darkness. This was all of this was in the plan, right? Which it boggles my mind. I don't understand it. I don't understand how it could all be in the plan, right? But if you're just honest with God and you're straightforward, tell him what confuses you. Tell him the problems that you have with your local church or with a particular belief or with something that you've discovered in science or whatever that's confusing you. Ask him. Be like, hey, this doesn't make sense. I want to know. I want to understand. Like, can you give me some sort of a perspective that makes sense of this? And if you're like, hey, I'm not sure about the supernatural stuff as well, ask him. Just be straightforward and ask him and say, hey, I don't get it. Like, none of this makes any sense. Josh's story sounds crazy. I need something for myself. Right?
Until you, as you say, until you look at it as a whole, it's beautiful.
Yes.
That dream of the dog and the clink and the, he can only go so far. And God knows it all. He gave you the dream. He gave you the Padre Pio book. He's here. Connect these two. See how this all works. He's bringing you to deliverance. That yes, Jesus is the one. I mean, it's a dazzling story, and you don't have to understand every aspect. Nor do any of us have to understand every aspect of our lives. We just we have puny brains to understand this.
We do. Let's just say that all of that experience definitely humbled me significantly because I relied a lot on my intellect, and it convinced me that, wait, hold on, I'm not going to be able to solve all the problems with my intellect. The problems that need to be solved need to start in the heart. I consider the finish, I guess, when I was at that, when the slide appeared on the screen that said deliverance, right? Like that's sort of the culmination where everything kind of clicked together, right? And I was like, I have to write this down. But nobody is going to believe it. And at this point in time, I'm just like, well, I hope my life and the fact that I'm trying to live as I imagine God wants us to is enough to convince you that I'm A, not crazy, and B, that I definitely do believe this now. So, for those who are Protestants, they tend to be upset at the whole Padre Pio thing. And it's enough to actually, I've had some people hint that maybe this was all demonic. Like the whole thing was demonic. Right?
And that's a heck of a demonic thing that brings you back to Christianity. So how do you figure that?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know where that logic comes from. I don't get it. But
well, they said the same thing to Jesus. It must be demonic that he's driving out demons. Hello?
Yeah, exactly. Part of the process, I think, of being in an established relationship with God is understanding just how little you know, and that your walk of faith is that. It's not about bullying other people around with beliefs or bullying other people around by trying to nitpick on little sins here and there or trying to control others. Look, like we're all in the same boat.
We're all sinners. Right? I mean, sinners go to heaven, sinners go to hell. Somebody's saying, I'm sorry, somebody isn't.
Exactly. Sometimes there's mystery. Catholic Church is one of the things I love about going to Mass is they always talk about the mystery of faith, right? And I wish that I think that is an element that we have to keep forefront in our mind is that there is mystery. And at the end of the day, when you strip away all of the questions, when you strip away all the intellectual stuff and everything, all of it, just wipe it all away for a second. Are you a person that God wants you to be? That's the question. Are you living your life the way God wants you to live it? And the only way you can find that out is by asking him, right? Like you have to go. So the only way that you're, first of all, going to have a good, be following God properly is if you have that righteousness with God, which obviously comes through Christ. But the point is that there has to be that connection, and then you're walking in faith. You are following Christ. So, there's all those concepts, and you are being a light to the world. That's my message. Yeah, and I know that there's probably going to be more to my story going forward.
You're not done yet. How old are you?
No, I'm 37.
Okay, you got a long way to go. He's had you on an interesting ride, just a really interesting ride. What I love, though, here's what I love about what God did with you. He takes you to a church in which you needed to learn that lesson about deliverance. That was the right church for you at that right moment. 5 years after Santosh came back from his near-death experience, 5 years, he has not stepped into a Christian church yet. He steps into Grace Church here locally. He goes in, and the pastor is speaking on the narrow door, the narrow gate, exactly his experience in his near-death experience. That's the church for him. And so, we argue all over stuff about, I can make my case for the Eucharist. I can make my case for Mary's role that a lot of people don't understand. It's so worn out. God meets us wherever we are, but he loves us too much to leave us there is true.
Right.
And you pointed at Howard Storm, and here's Howard Storm. Well, what do you want me to do? I want you to go back and basically love the person in front of you. Yeah, but what do you want me to do? That's it. It's harder than you think. And the guy becomes a pastor, Protestant pastor, and that's his experience, is his experience.
Yes. I am convinced now that God knows that we like to debate and argue with each other. And it's just a part of who we are as humans. And the reality is that I think he also knows that we have a tendency toward this like intellectual pride thing, and we like to lord it over other people. And I think he's kind of in the business of confounding us. God is far more interested in what's going on in your heart and whether he knows you. And by knows you means is intimately involved in your life. And I pray to God all the time. I'm like, show me where the devil is working. You know, Jesus said he came to destroy the works of the devil, right? So if we're going to also live that out in our lives of being a light that's able to help destroy the works of the devil, we have to know a little bit about how he works. Right? Jesus said, be innocent as doves, but as shrewd as serpents, right? The idea being, you know how a serpent thinks, so that way you can counteract it. But you yourself are pure inside. You yourself, in the depths of your being, have pure motives. And God sees those pure motives. And if you're going to him, he will show you how to walk through things. And as Jesus says, you know, my sheep hear my voice.
And you bring up the point, the spiritual battle. We're all a spiritual battleground. They're fighting over every one of us.
Yep,
and so many of us are oblivious to that fact. Just oblivious. I used to be there. I understand oblivious. I totally get it.
Well, me too. Yeah. So keep your chin up. Keep your face forward. Pray every day. And always try to show as much love as you possibly can to everyone, even during those dark periods. And, you know, the devil will flee from you. He will run away from you when he sees you doing that.
I was about to ask you, what's your takeaway? Was that it?
Oh, we can make that my takeaway. How's that?
That was good. That was very good.
I love this podcast. I absolutely love this podcast. And I love the fact that you're giving, that you're open to varieties of experiences in relation to turning to Christ and living out that life. I think God really wants unity in the church. And part of that unity is realizing that, hey, other people might think differently, but God's still working in their life too.
Thanks, Josh. God will meet you wherever you are. Atheists, not a problem for God. What's your story? Let me know. What is it? Angel encounter, divine intervention? What is it? Let me know here at touchedbyheaven.net, patreon.com. Right, Roy?
You're so bashful about asking for money.
I'm trying to get braver. I really am. Patreon.com, or come here to episode 293 and click your way through. Just search for Trapper Jack, okay? Okay. And we'll do this again next week here at Touched by Heaven. Everyday encounters with God. I'm Trapper Jack, thanking you for listening wherever you may be right now.
And I'm like, why is she bothering me here in the bathroom? Yeah, what do you need?